All right, we are back with another episode of the Real Estate Investing Club. Today we have Alexander Cartright with us from Villicus Capital. This is going to be a good one. We don't often have people, we have tons of different asset classes and people who do different strategies on the podcast. We're at number, 450 something now. And so it's very rare that we get a new strategy onto the podcast. And this is one of those days. So I'm super excited because Alex will take us into the economics of hotel conversions. That's something I've always thought about this hotel motel, turning it into an apartment complex. But I've never talked to anybody who knows about it, who's done it. And so this should be good. Alex, thank you very much for hopping on the show.
I'm glad to be here, and congratulations on doing 450 episodes. That is no small feat, and I'm sure your listeners appreciate it.
Yeah. It's I'm glad I started. I don't think I've ever told the story of how I started the podcast. It was in COVID. And so, I was out there, I was talking. Normally I would go out to like meetups and I'd talk to people and I was networking, and then COVID hit and I was just stuck inside all day. And I was like, well, shit, now I gotta find a new way to do this. And so I started the podcast, and I'm super glad I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, hey, I told you before we got on here, we always start the podcast with the story of how the guest, you, got into real estate, because everybody has a good story on how they got started. It's always, random
Sure.
and off the cuff. So why don't you go back to the beginning of how you got started? Tell us how you got into real estate.
Sure. So I am an economics professor, and when I was in graduate school for economics, I was looking to do a house hack routine. I was going to school in a major metro area. It was very expensive. And so I wanted to buy something small and rent out the rooms and make it so that I could work less and focus on school. And the bank just didn't have enough faith in me as a young, like 22-year-old with no money. And so that was pretty disappointing. So I could not get into real estate until I graduated and got a real job. And so I know what it's like to be there. And what I did is, because I was so just amazed and infatuated with the idea of buying something and like cutting it into pieces and renting out the pieces of it, like rooms in a house. This was right when Uber X was really taking off. And so I
Yeah.
went out and bought a bunch of cars before all the loans hit my credit. And then I turned around and rented those cars to different drivers that wanted to drive on Uber.
You
And I would
started a taxi service. I love it.
Right, right. And so I rent the cars and took a percentage of people's earnings and in exchange for use on the car. And I leased some garage space in the downtown area of Washington, D.C., where people could come and take the car from. And they'd use the car for however long they wanted to, and then they'd turn it back in. But the goal was always to replicate that model of buying something, repurposing it, like selling it on a temporary basis in real estate. So when I got started with like a lot of people with 2 units, and then it was, I mean, nothing really sexy. And but seriously, this is what people in that situation need to do. I drove a Prius and lived in 2 units and did not remodel the unit that I lived in, like had duct tape on my refrigerator and had a dishwasher that didn't work and a stove with only 2 burners that worked, and just plowed everything I had into the units that I was renting and slowly scaled. And while that is maybe boring and requires patience, like that is a surefire way to get it done.
Yeah.
And what then those over time I could invest more and more. And by the way, this is only starting in like 2017. And so those units compounded more and more. I got to a couple dozen units, and people had seen my success, friends and family, and so they were looking to place capital with me. I had heard about the syndication model, and so I started doing some multifamily syndication. And then in around 2020, 2021, when interest rates are falling like a brick and cap rates are falling like a brick, there just weren't a lot of good deals on multifamily, right? Like there weren't the deals that I was used to. And I found some deals off market, driving for dollars, networking with people, and tried to find the diamond in the rough with the seller finance. And I was doing what I had learned, and I'm not knocking this model, but it was just like what everyone else was doing, looking for the C class property in the B class neighborhood that you could buy, redo the flooring, and do some paint and bump the rents and then refi and get a big payday. Nothing wrong with that model. That's a great model. It's just everybody is doing that. It's like
Hmm.
everyone's trying to wholesale and everyone's trying to flip. And I realized that I don't have any moat. Like I don't have any, there's no barriers to entry around doing that. And if I were to find a really good deal, multifamily deal to syndicate, like at some level it was luck. Like there are other big operators out there that could find better off market deals. They knew the brokers. They could get better debt terms. They've got their own construction crew, or they could throw around their big company weight and get better deals on the materials and labor. And I came to understand that I needed a strategy to differentiate myself. And I needed to be able to not just get lucky by finding good deals, but I needed to be able to find consistent deals. And the way that you do that is by looking for stuff that other people are not looking for. So in I needed a niche.
Yep.
And this is what frankly every other business does. Like they try and differentiate their product and so that they're not competing directly with other people. Like Starbucks sells coffee, it's they try and make it a little bit different and so that they can charge some more for it. They try and build a brand around it. So I went to a conference, met with a broker actually that said, "Hey, I know of this hotel for sale in your area, and I think it makes sense as a conversion, like conversion to multifamily." And I thought that is a royal pain in the ass. Like you gotta deal with the city and get the zoning changed. I don't even know how to do that. I don't know anything about zoning. And then you gotta do a ton of construction. And we're not just talking about remodeling, like we're
Yeah.
talking about adding electrical and plumbing to rooms. We're
Well, the
talking
other
about
thing, and sorry to jump into your story here, but
no
whenever I
problem.
hear about hotel motel conversions, I've stayed in countless hotels, and I always think if you were to convert this into an apartment, every single unit would be a studio unit. I mean, there's just
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense in terms of what you're offering to the market. Most
Let's
people
come
want
back
two
to
bed,
that.
three bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
let's come back to that. That's a great point. So you got the unit mix objection that you got a bunch of studios. And what's a better objection? Actually, so I'm not as worried about that anymore after a couple years of research, and I'll tell you why. But I think what a better objection is, let's say you got a 150 unit hotel, 150 studios. Are we going to be able to lease those up as quickly as a traditional multifamily? We got to worry about the absorption rate. And then, of course, we got to worry about, do we have the right fire suppression system? Do we have enough parking? Do we have enough? Because a lot of hotels have one-to-one parking, like one room, one parking space. Whereas in multifamily, it's more like 1.25 to 1.3, depending on where you are. And then somehow you got to get the franchise off these hotels, and
Yeah.
somebody's got to be paid to do that. And during your due diligence
Oh, I didn't even
period,
think about
it's
that.
the
Yeah.
owner to wait for all this to happen. So there's all this complexity going on. And I said, this is a huge pain in the ass, but I went and looked at this hotel anyway, and I saw the potential, and I thought, let's just start doing some underwriting and put pen to paper. And I thought that I could not find where there was an error in my Excel file because the numbers just kept coming out so good. And I stayed up like half the night doing these numbers by hand. And I came to the realization that while there are some additional complexities, like, well, I don't mean to sugarcoat it, there are additional complexities. Those are problems that are worth solving. And just like with any kind of investing, when you encounter a problem, you put a price on it, right? Like it's an ugly house, needs a new roof, needs a new bathroom, whatever. You just put a price on it and see whether or not the returns are worth it. Same story with a hotel. So it's got bigger problems. You just put prices on those problems. You learn how to get better at putting prices on those problems. And then you just step back and say, okay, are these problems worth solving? And when you're looking at hotels that are 25 to 35,000 a door in markets where multifamily is selling for 150 to 180,000 dollars a door, you can afford to solve a lot of problems and still make a lot of money. And then I came to realize that hotels are usually in phenomenal locations, right? Close to major metro, close to retail, etc. And hotels are also built to have amenities in them, and they're
Mm,
gym,
yeah.
pool, common area space, amenities that competing C-class properties don't usually have. And then lastly, and this is the big one, there's not a lot of demand for old hotels. Like,
Sure.
unlike apartments, hotels kind of have a lifespan. Like, after you've remodeled the hotel a couple times as a Holiday Inn, well, then maybe it becomes a Best Western, and then maybe it becomes a Super 8. And then after a couple of remodels, and it's the franchise forces you to remodel. They make you go on what's called a PIP, property improvement plan,
Oh,
every 5 to 7 years. And so after a couple remodels, that it's just not worth remodeling anymore. The company will turn around and just build a new hotel.
yeah.
Like, there are new hotels in every given town. So these hotels have a finite lifespan, and so at some point there aren't buyers for them, and you can come in and get them at a really attractive basis. Plus, just the way the world has changed, where business travel has not bounced back to pre-COVID levels, and when it comes to these two-star hotels, like, they have this kind of reputation of being a little bit seedy, a little bit dangerous, a little bit sketchy, and people that are looking for an affordable place to stay, they go to like VRBO and Airbnb. They don't really go to the roadside motels anymore.
Right.
So you got low demand for properties that are sitting there with at low prices that have got lots of amenities. And then to your question about the unit mix, well, you've got a lot of people buying the C and B class stuff and upgrading it, right? And with the slowdown in new construction, the high interest rates, you got fewer people buying starter homes. And with
Mm,
the low interest rates, people that would ordinarily want to sell their homes are holding onto their homes, right? So there's like very few homes being built, where very few. We're building homes the same rate today we were in 1994, even though we're spending more money on construction than ever.
right.
So we're not building as many homes. There's more demand for homes. All of that crowds people into the rental market and pushes rents up. And where are all these people going? The B and A class properties. And and everyone's trying to buy a C class apartment complex and upgrade it to a B. That squeezes the supply of C class. And you know what we cannot afford to build? Like, of the few things we're building, what we definitely can't afford to build is C class.
Right.
So the fact that they're all studios, not a big deal, because that's where all the demand is. All the demand is for what I like to call workforce housing, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't say affordable because that kind of implies that it's subsidized or it's coming with a Section 8 voucher. But all the demand is for affordable. The people that are making the 30 to high $40,000 a year that need, or less, that need the $800 to $1,100 a month basic apartment that's clean, safe, comes with the utilities included. Like, there's demand for that in every city in America and in every economic environment. And so I was like,
Okay, wait. So
the
you use one
stars
little
are
thing
aligning,
just
and that's the niche.
yeah.
So there's my
No,
abbreviated. Sorry, go ahead, Gabe.
I love it. You've sold me, but so you one line in there you just said comes with utilities included. And so
Yeah.
it sounds like when you're buying these, you are not sub-metering each unit.
Okay. So I know that sounds weird also, right? By the way, let me just say this took years to figure out,
Yeah.
because it was like when I first started to do this, you would go to cities and you'd be like, I want to change the zoning. They'd be like, well, we don't even have a process for that. We don't even know how to do it in some places. And then you'd go to a lender and they would be like, wait a minute, is it a hotel or is it an apartment? You go to get insurance, they'd be like, wait a minute, is it a hotel or is it an apartment? And wait, are you going to like shut down hotel operations? Or are you going to run them while you're remodeling? It's all these different questions. And one of these big questions that frankly took me like 2 years to figure out, now that I've cracked the code on all this stuff, is the utilities. So I know that sounds kind of weird, because a very bread and butter value add on like a
It
C class property
it
is
actually
implement a
does
rub
not.
system,
Yeah, it
right?
doesn't sound crazy weird to me because I run long-term stay RV parks, and in long-term
Mm,
stay RV parks, you pay for utilities, and it's essentially the same thing. Like you have
hmm.
lower income people coming, staying at the property, but you're paying for the utilities. The numbers still make sense. So I
Right.
it's unique in stick built. But it makes a lot of sense to me. So keep going.
Yeah. So like, and I've got other buildings where we've come in, we start billing back water, start billing back gas, right? Things like that. And that's absolutely worth it it can absolutely be worth it, especially on a traditional apartment complex. But here, it's not worth it to go and install sub meters on a 150 unit hotel, even if these are meters that aren't necessarily billing directly to the utility company. They're just meters of usage so that you can read internally and bill back to the tenant. Well, I mean, $400 or $500 a meter, a couple $100 to install. Why? And then I got to pay somebody to go around and read them every month, and then I got to do the billing for all of those units. Why? Why? These are 300-400 square foot units. Would just and the simplicity of come in, you pay one price, you've got the water, you've got the electricity, you got the gas, you got the internet, and you got the cable already included. One price, come right in. Like
Yeah.
right now, we're paying for internet at one of my properties like $1,200 a month. This is just like
Jesus
$10
Christ.
a unit or something. Paying like
Yeah.
$1,100 for cable,
Yeah.
right? And it's like it's $8 a unit. That's a huge value add to somebody that's looking at the competing C-class studio, of which there aren't that many,
Yeah. Then they
where
got to
they
pay
have to
$100
pay.
for their internet. Yeah.
Sure, they got to pay, 50, $60 for their internet, maybe 100 with cable. Whereas for us to just be able to include it, that's a huge value add. Or the people at the lower income, wait a minute, I don't have to call the utility company and like make a deposit and go through a credit check. I can just take away these friction points, come right in, it's included in the rent.
Nice. Um, Yeah, it's a very unique model, and I like it specifically because it seems like it solves, the big problem that most people are talking about, the housing crisis. There's not enough housing, especially in these big markets where, DFW, Seattle, I'm sure the market that you're into, there's
Yeah.
just not enough housing, and the
I don't
economics
have
don't make.
anything. I don't have anything in DFW or I'm in Houston. Houston's one of my target markets right now.
Okay, okay,
And I can tell you why I like that. I also like I mean, I like a lot of markets, mostly the Midwest and Southeast. Doing another project right now in Virginia and looking at more in Houston. Would love to do a project in Dallas, just haven't found the right property yet.
yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question. I feel like this model will only make sense in the more expensive markets. If you're going into like Dayton, Ohio, where rents are already relatively low,
Yeah.
it just doesn't feel like it would compute in or it would pencil in that market. And so
Yeah, yes and no. So here, I'll tell you why you're right. So I don't like it where we're talking about like exactly like you're talking about a Dayton, Ohio market. I've looked at properties there, so you're right. Where like we can't reliably lease up those studios or one bedrooms for like more than $750. Even if you buy the property cheap, it's usually just not worth it because what you got to watch out for with C class is the repair costs don't necessarily get lower when the rents come down. So like I got to pay the same for toilets, for windows, for drywall, for paint, for roofing, etc. as if I when I rent the $750 studio as where I rent the $900 studio, right? So if a tenant puts their fist through a wall or a window or etc., that's a lot bigger percentage of my monthly income. There's a lot lower margin for error there.
yeah,
So you're right. However, there's kind of like two buy boxes that I go after. And one of the buy boxes could make sense in the Dayton, Ohio market. So let me tell you about that. One buy box is to look for the extended stay hotels. These
mm,
are like the hometown studios, the Candlewoods, right? The town place suites, where they've got kitchenettes in every room already, and they've got sprinklers in every room. And so you're not really doing much of a physical conversion. The
mm,
conversion is really just the zoning. And then, of
right,
course, it gets reappraised as a multifamily, which is a much lower cap rate than a hotel. So it's really just a financial conversion, not a physical construction conversion.
right,
That type of buy box, it's not going to work in the Dayton, Ohio type low rent market. And I'm not trying to hate on people from Dayton, Ohio, but not going to work in the lower rent market, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
those type of properties are a lot more per door. But
yeah,
the other buy box is like the mom and pop, meaning no franchise on it, motel exterior corridor, meaning when you open
Yep.
the front door, it goes to
They're
the outside,
outside. Yep.
right? Those kind of properties, especially like a small unit count, like sub 40, there is nobody buying that stuff. You can't put any franchise on it. And what that means is you can get that stuff super cheap. And those sellers know that they've got to go seller financing because a lot of banks don't want to lend on
Yeah.
that product. So if
Yep.
you can find the right box where you get some really sweet seller financing, you're picking it up really cheap, then even in the Dayton, Ohio market, you can make it work, right? It's just tougher.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So when you're identifying these properties, it sounds like you are looking for, I mean, generally you're looking for a little bit higher price point, price per door on the multifamily side
Right.
markets. And then also, do you look for a specific age, a specific unit count? Like what does your buy box look like when you're looking for these hotel motels?
Yeah. Good for the Gabe, you're doing such a good job for the audience because you're like pushing me to give away all the secrets, which I'll do. No, I'll do it. So what exactly am I looking for in terms of age and unit counts? I would say that just because you've got these like fixed costs of doing a deal, raising money, getting a loan, right? Like finding, vetting, going through the zoning process, etc., that I don't really look at sub 50 units. Now,
Mm,
if it was something right down the street that I could, kind of already plug my local management right into, then I would consider it. But sub 50 units is less interesting just because the gains aren't there. But I would say over 150 units, those hotels tend to not be good fits either.
yeah, more
Specifically
competition.
because, well, when you're over 150 units, um, you are you got to worry about absorption, right? You got to worry about how quickly you're leasing up. And you've also are looking at hotels that are kind of like very vertical downtown type hotels that
Mm,
usually have a lot of banquet space, meeting space, and like
yeah,
big pools and stuff that is just not going to be a value add. You're not going to be able to amenitize or monetize all of that extra space.
yeah,
So usually like 50 to 150 is the sweet spot. In terms of age, it doesn't matter that much.
right.
If you can get something that's like newer than 85, it likely doesn't have, I'm sorry, it likely does have a sprinkler system, especially if it's like more than 3 stories, it'll have a sprinkler system. So there's just one thing that the city doesn't have to turn around and demand that
Fix.
you put in. But aside from that, one thing you mentioned that I'm not looking for that much is like where the multifamily price per door is high. I mean, like the multifamily price per door is more than 30 grand a unit in most markets, right? So
Oh yeah,
like
easy.
I check the multifamily comps, of course, but it's it's almost always higher. So
Yeah.
I'm less worried about that. But in
Okay.
general, like if you are going to remember one metric, um, remember the 2% rule. So you've probably heard of the 1% rule in like single
Hmm.
family investing that
Hmm.
we want our $100,000 house to rent for $1,000 a month. And that's just I'm not saying if it doesn't hit that criteria, it's not a good deal. That's just a real good like rule of thumb to know whether or not you got a good deal. The hotel conversion world, I'm usually looking for a 2% rule. So I want my price per unit plus my construction, my all-in price per unit to I want rents that are 2% of that all-in price per unit. So if I'm all in for 50,000, maybe that's a 40,000 or $35,000 unit that needs $15,000 worth of rehab. Um, then I want to see rents for at least $1,000. That's kind of the best rule of thumb.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, man. I mean, there's so many things I could ask, but this is a short form podcast, so we do have to
Hmm.
move it on. Actually, one last question I'm going to ask you. When you're doing conversions, the construction side, when I'm thinking about I'm staying in a hotel, there's a lot of things that are missing. One of them being a actual kitchen. I'm assuming that is your biggest price or construction uh, like ticket item that you have to make the conversion of is just
Yeah.
adding a kitchen to the units. Is that right?
Yeah, and specifically within that, the biggest price is usually the electrical upgrades.
Yeah.
So usually we're adding a couple circuits to each room.
Yeah.
for the major
On the
appliances
bigger,
that'll
you
go
have
in
to
a
switch out the
kitchen.
breakers, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, usually we'll add sub panels on each floor, and but hopefully there's enough service coming to the building. If there's not enough juice coming to the building, this is rarely an issue, but it can be, right? And this is stuff you figure out in your due diligence. Then it can be expensive to upgrade the electrical, get more juice to come to the building. Not a deal killer, right? Just put a price on those problems. That's the most expensive.
Yeah.
But
That makes
adding a
sense.
kitchen, like we're only talking about like 5 cabinets, right? Max. And we're talking about some basic appliances. Sometimes we'll go with the full 30-inch range. Sometimes we'll just go with the two-burner cooktop that actually works off of 110. Kind of depends on the market and the size of the rooms.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you spilling the beans on that strategy. It's definitely unique, and I love to hear that. I'm going to push us into the quick question round. Are you ready?
Sure.
Let's do it. It starts with books or any form of education, could be Netflix shows, YouTube channels, whatever. I just need two recommendations, one for general life wisdom and then one for real estate.
Wow, that's great. I mean, you can, I don't know,
Yeah, I
not
was going to
everyone
say, you
on
got
video,
plenty
you
of
can
books
see
back there.
behind. Yeah, I got plenty more beyond that, right? Let me just say in general, I don't know that it's possible to spend too much money on books. Like, even if you don't read them all, like,
Yeah.
so what, right? You can buy tons and tons of great books for like $10 used on Amazon. Even if you read one chapter of them, it's going to give you some idea that's literally thousands and thousands of percent ROI on your $10. So just, you need books in your life so badly. You should put a minimum amount in your budget every month that you're spending on books. Like, just spend $100 a month on books and you're better off. So having said that, I got a strong bias toward buying stuff. I would say that for general knowledge, I love the book Range, Range. And I will, hard to give a quick synopsis, but that book is about, maybe you've heard how Tiger Woods' dad made him play golf for 10,000 hours, and other athletes and like chess players practice something for 10,000 hours, and that's how they master it. They do it for 10,000 hours. So
Yeah.
that book essentially says that the 10,000 hours rule is bullshit, and that people that become real leaders in their field and they become highly innovative, they have range. They know ideas from lots of different fields, and they're able to take concepts from lots of different fields and apply them to new places. And that book makes as like an economics professor, I like to think that economics is a bunch of tools for solving an unlimited set of problems. And so that book has a special place in my heart. And he makes the case that reading and knowing lots of different stuff will just help you be a more curious, more creative, and more effective person, whatever your goals are, especially in entrepreneurship. So that's my can't miss, Range, Range by David Epstein.
Nice. And the subtitle is Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. That's looks good. I actually just bought it on
Good,
Amazon audiobooks. So
good.
you've
And
got
how
me.
much was it? How much was it?
It's well, I do the audiobook, the can or whatever Amazon
Right. All right. So
audio
you're
thing.
paying like $15 a month for 3 books, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So so he paid like $5 for it, guys.
yeah.
You can't
Easy.
afford not to buy. Like, if the transactions cost were low enough, I would just give it to you for $5. It's that good. You need to
Yeah.
get it. I don't get any royalties off of this book, just for the record, right? Um, and for real estate specifically, I think that if you haven't read Joe Fairless, the best ever syndication book, I think that's a real great place to start. Tell you a whole lot of introductory stuff about real estate finance and multifamily, and that's a great jumping off point. I think you gotta buy and go through that if you haven't yet.
Yeah, that's a solid one.
Mhm.
All right. Next question is for your younger self. So let's go back to the Alex who was just trying that first house hack way back in the day. Go back to him, look him in the eye, give him one piece of advice moving forward.
I would go to more conferences. I would say that right behind books, like the ROI from going to conferences it's just huge, because I think about a lot how every like problem, bottleneck that I've got in my real estate business, like how do we find more hotels, more construction people, raise more money, etc. Like every problem you have in your real estate business, somebody else has solved that problem, right? And you just gotta, or somebody else can help you solve that problem. You just gotta meet them
Yep.
and build a relationship with them. So I would say that I would, and now I'm very intentional about trying to go to a conference every month, and
Oh, every month. Wow. Oh, it looks like Alex
I
is
learned so
running. Oh,
much.
there we go. He's back. All
Oh,
right. So you froze there for a second. So you go
I
every
was saying
month for a
I
conference.
try, I try. I can't
Okay.
always do it, right? But that's what I aspire to. And I never regret going. Does it cost money? Yeah, of course it does. But again, think of the ROI, right? And if you're serious about scaling in real estate, you're going to get in a room with other people that are serious about scaling.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially if you're going to ones that are, unique to a specific asset class, you start to see the same people over and over, and that's you start developing relationships. So, I've been meaning to go to more. I haven't. I go to the self storage conference because that's what I buy, but I wanted to break out and go into more. So that's good advice for your younger self.
Mhm.
All right, next question is about the U.S. It's a big place, a lot of opportunity. Pick one of the metros out there as your most favorite and the metro you're most excited to invest in anywhere in the
Hmm.
U.S.
Hmm. Houston, Texas.
Houston.
No, no zoning laws, outrageous population growth. All right. And underperforming hotel market.
All
So
right.
there's a lot of hotels to be purchased. You don't have to worry about zoning. You just comply with building codes and you can change the use. And you have I mean, fundamentally, what's driving growth for apartments, like household formation and prices, it's population growth, and that population growth's got to be like underheld by job growth. And Houston has got that. And in my model of the world, like it's just extremely hard to make a city of 8 million people crumble economically.
Yeah.
And so yeah, if I had to pick one metro, it would be Houston.
Yeah. I've always wanted to talk to an economics professor about Detroit and about the car manufacturer collapse and how that city was affected because it's a really interesting kind
You
of case study.
bring me back and I'll tell you there's a lot going on there, right? There's a lot that happened economically that shifted a lot of labor to China, and Detroit was in a unique position to get hit from that. And there's also just absolutely asinine political leadership and just terrible policies that
Mm.
have and in the face of all of that, it's like amazing that as many people still live there, right? It points out to the resilience of when you get a whole bunch of people together in a city, there's what we call, here's something that I know we don't have time to go into. People can look it up. This is called agglomeration effects or agglomeration economies. Um, and essentially just get like services and firms and different industries. They all want to be close together and they all benefit from being close together. So once you get a whole bunch of people close together, like in New York, like it that has
Sticky.
such powerful economic effects, even in the light of crazy high taxes and other bad stuff, people stick around because there's
Yeah.
such a benefit from having a bunch of people close together. That's called an agglomeration economy.
Huh. That's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to go into it, but it's definitely something I'd like to hear in the future.
Mhm.
All right, but I'm going to move us on to the next question. And this is about finding deals. It all starts with getting in contact with the seller, signing that purchase agreement. So, what's your favorite way to generate leads and find new deals?
Yeah, I I've got some brands that I know, uh, like, I'll tell all my secrets here. Oyo is a brand, OYO. All right.
Ohio. Okay.
Very, very low standards. Hotels seem to go to that, like when they're right before
When
they
they're
go to
about
mom
to
and pop,
die.
like, right? Like when they're on the edge of the death spiral. Okay. So I look at that. I look for hotels that haven't been remodeled in a while, and I know that they They probably can't afford to remodel because maybe the debt's maturing. You can get on CoStar and look at where debts are maturing. Um, but there, and I know everyone says this, but it's true. There's just not really a substitute for talking to brokers because brokers are talking to owners. And if you've positioned yourself as somebody that is smart and competent and is an expert in that market, you keep reaching out, keep talking to them. Eventually, you're going to get a deal,
Yep.
right? You'll be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. Yeah. That is something that cannot be replaced. And pretty much everybody who comes on this podcast at least mentions it. Making broker connections, you know, good deals are sold before they hit the market. That's what I always say. It's like if you want to get a good deal, make sure and just talk to brokers because once it hits the market, they're going to, push those low cap rates and it's not going to get what you want. So,
Right.
um, yeah, good advice. All right, next question. Second to last question. This is about lessons learned. Not every deal goes the way that we expect it. A lot of times a wrench is thrown into the mix and
Yeah.
we get to learn a lesson. So, what was a deal that went a little bit sideways for you? And then what was the lesson you pulled from it?
I had a deal one time where a couple weeks before closing, actually, I don't remember if it was a couple weeks, could have been even closer. Um, there was a hostage situation at the property, and there was some gunfire exchanged and a death,
Oh,
and
geez.
that spooked the lender, that spooked the insurance folks, and that spooked some investors, and I ended up losing a lot of earnest money on that deal. I don't regret that, right? Like I think not having the having no deal instead of a bad deal is better. But that really came to just emphasize to me the importance of making sure that you understand what crime is like in the neighborhood and
Yeah,
and making sure that even if you're in a good neighborhood, that if there is a history of crime at that property, that makes lenders and insurance companies nervous.
yeah,
And it can be hard to change the narrative on that.
yeah. Yeah, I that was one of my biggest lessons too, is buying a property, a self-storage facility in an area, good metro. The numbers for the metro itself were great, but the specific area that I bought was had a propensity for property crime. And
Mm,
yeah, it's a lesson you don't want to learn the hard way. So that is a
right,
good lesson learned.
right.
All right. This is brings us to the last question, and this is for the listeners. You've given us a ton of great wisdom. We appreciate it. I appreciate it. I'm sure people want to reach out, get in contact with you. How can they find you? And then what can they expect when they reach out?
Yeah. So always looking for hotel deals. If you have a hotel that you'd love for me to look over and give you some feedback on, I'm glad to do that. If of course, if you're interested in being involved in a hotel deal or just learning more about how to do this, maybe making that your niche, you're glad to reach out to me and I'm glad to be a resource there. I'm trying to be more active on LinkedIn and like post something a couple times a week about hotel conversion and real estate. And so if you're on LinkedIn, connect with me there. Or you can go to my company website, Vilicus, Vilicus. Vilicus stands for steward in Latin, and I like the name and think of ourselves as good stewards of our investors' capital. Vilicus.capital is our website, and you can get in contact there.
Perfect. I will put that link in the show notes. So if y'all want to reach out, just click the little more in the description. It'll pull down that full description. And in there, you can find Alex's link. All right, man. That wraps it up. Again, I appreciate you hopping on the show.
Cool. Very glad to.
Absolutely. For everybody who's here with us today, thank you guys for showing up. You are the reason we do this. So if you guys have any questions, reach out to me, Gabe at the realestateinvestingclub.com. If you want to support the show, just give us a like, subscribe, share, all that jazz. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great week. Keep rocking real estate, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.